Okay, Javier, here we have something that came out of the weekly meetings that we have in the office. This it was like a little bit difficult at the beginning, but I think it's really interesting. It's basically a functional test of the security system. So you know that sometimes companies ask you like, "Hey, can you make these roles for me?" And then you have like 14 roles that they want, and then you need to test them somehow. And usually you do that by going to the screens, logging in, logging out, and check if you have permissions, like seeing it for you in the UI. That takes an awful amount of time. So uh, with this idea, you can replace that in the end. So let me show you what we have here. Basically, we have a XAF application. Is basically a file new project application is empty. There is only like one type of object, which is customer. And that's it. It's a really simple object, basically, just for as an example. And then also we have one controller, the customer controller. The customer controller contains one simple action that is actually empty because we just needed to test purposes in the end. So this is the idea. The idea is that you will have your staff application. This is a staff application that is Windows Forms and Blazor, and that you want to test the security system. You want to test the roles that you have. So as you know, usually when you create a new application, the first role and the first users are created in the updater. So let's go and check the updater. The updater, basically, there are two methods there. One is update database before update the schema, and one after update the schema. So this one means that the schema is already created, so we can be sure that we can insert data in general. So in here, basically, this is what you get when you do file new project. Um, you create an instance of a user and then another instance for an admin. And then you set the admin role and the default role. The default role is the interesting one because the administrative role is basically is the all powerful. You don't need anything there. So if you check the default role, um, here you see some permissions, at least some of the stuff are denied. So for example, here I did this and I put this note here because I wanted this role to deny basically everything. So I set the permission policy to deny all by default. Also, what I did is I denied the navigation to the customer list view. It will not show anyway, but sometimes if it's not denied, somehow you can have a permission there. It looks like it's allowed, even if it's not allowed. So I explicitly deny the navigation to the customer list view. And also I added the only action that we have in that controller that I showed you before to the action permission. So it basically means that it's going to be disabled. So basically this role disable or deny everything in general. So far so good. How do we test this? Well, easy. First, we need to create a test application. So let me show you the test application. It's basically a descendant of the XAF application. And then we just need to override this, the layout manager, because this application doesn't show a UI. There is no UI layer here. It's only like a logic layer. So in here, we return null, and that's the only thing that we need to do. So let's go and check the security test. So first, we'll check the setup method. So in here, what I use is how to use the security system in console applications for Windows Forms. So that's this tutorial about. And basically what we did is like we create a memory data store provider because we don't want to connect to the database in the end. We want to create everything in memory, and after the test stop, everything will be clear from memory. So we create a memory data store provider. Then we create an instance of the application, and then we need to create a object space provider. In this case, we're creating an XPO object space provider. So this is using the memory database as data store. Then, and I did it like this in the tutorials from Developer Express. There are some tutorials that are almost the same, that are, okay, if you want to check the security system or the role, do this and do that, and they use this framework for mocking. So I didn't want to mock anything here for one reason. I wanted to show everyone that this is the flow of the application. This is how an application works. So also I wanted to show them is like, you don't need to mock the test. You can use the data that you already have, at least in the module, in the agnostic module and the updater, to run your first test at least. A lot of people put all the possible roles of the application there. So if you have them, if you have those roles there already, why to create them again in general? So that's why we, in this case, we are creating an instance of the agnostic module, which is basically this one here. And after that, we tell, okay, application, these are the modules that you need to load. And we pass the module. And then we tell application do setup, we pass a name, and we pass an object space. So, sorry, an object space provider. So after that, the application is set up. So basically, it's forwarding this object space provider to everything, to every place of the application where it's needed. So after that, we tell the object space provider, okay, create an updating object space. This is the one that you are using in the updater module. So if you come here, you will see that in the constructor of this class, you have an object space and a version object. So that's what we're doing in here. We're creating an object space, and then for the version, we pass null. If you need to pass a specific version, then you create an instance of that object, but in this case, we don't need it. So then we create an instance of the updater. This updater is this updater here. So we pass the object space, and then we pass the version that in this case is null, and we call both methods. Update database before update the schema, and update database after update the schema. So basically, this will be called, and this will be called also. So let's go back to the test. And that's it. That's basically the startup of the application. So let's go to the test.
Jose, it's good to mention that the updater database after update schema is important to call it, because that's the one who actually will create all the roles for you in memory so you can test.
Yeah, that's why I did it like this, because I wanted to show the flow of a normal application. So in a normal application, you just have to, I mean, the application runs that at the beginning. And here I do it manually, just to show the flow. So yes, it's important that you need to run both of, at least one of these, which is this one, because the roles are going to be created there. So then we have the test. So let's see this test. Users should not be able to create a customer. Why? Because we know that in the updater, we create the default role, which basically denies everything, and the user is in that role. So in here, first we log in. So let me show you the login method. And in the login method, we create an object space. We create an authentication standard class. And then we create an instance of the security system, the complex security system in this case. We pass the type of user that we're using and the type of role and the authentication class. And then we set the logon parameters. We create a new instance of the authentication standard logon parameters. We pass the username and password. And then we do the logon. After this, basically, we can create a new instance of the secure object space provider. For this provider, you pass the security strategy and the data store provider. So what is this object space provider about? the idea is that this is the object space provider that takes the security system in consideration. So you know that you can, at any moment in the application, you can tell application create object space. And with that object space, you can create new records, delete records, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, that will happen if you have a non-secure object space provider. But if you, like the XPO object space provider that we created here, this doesn't take in account the security system, but this one here does. So what does that mean? It means that if the user that just log on doesn't have permissions to create a customer, when you try to commit that transaction, it will fail. So that's the beauty about that object space provider, that it takes in account the roles in general. So the security system is not only working in the UI level, it's working in the data level also. So, okay, let's go back to the test. So in this case, the user should not be able to create customers. So we're logging as user without password. We get an instance of the security system, security strategy. Then we have the secure object space provider. So we create an object space for this. And with this object space, we basically come here and create a customer. We don't even set any properties to the customer. We just commit the transaction. So this will basically throw an exception. The exception that we're waiting here is that the user is a user-friendly exception, and is in the security layer. It's a security layer exception. So this is the exception that we're waiting for, but also in the end, we are asserting the message. We want to check if the message that we get from this exception is equals to this. Because this can happen for many reasons. So just to make sure that we're getting the right one, we're comparing the message that we get in the exception with this, that is the message that we expect actually to have. So let's run this. So let's wait a little bit. And see, this is the exception that we're getting. So it's the type of exception that we expected actually. See, this one is exactly this type. So then let's continue. And then let's check the exception message. The exception message is this text. That is the text that we were expecting actually. So basically this test is correct. If we log in with user, we should not be able to create a customer because that role denies everything. So let's continue to the next type of test. So sometimes we want to just check the role, check if the role of the current logged in user allows some operations. So in this case, I'm checking the operations. So see, we log in again. Then from the application, we get the security strategy. Also, we can get this security strategy from this method. This method will return exactly the same. So get it from wherever you want in this case. And then we check with the security strategy, can create customer, can write customer, can delete customer. And we are expecting false in all these cases. All these cases. Why? Because in the updater, everything is denied. The permission policy for this user basically will deny everything. So that's why we're expecting everything to be false. And then we're also checking the navigation. And I put a note in here that I did this test without setting a permission for the navigation, expecting that it will be denied, but it was not. So it means that you need to explicitly deny the navigation in order to be actual deny, I mean, or for this method to return false, actually. So let's run this and let's come here and run the debug. So we log in as user again, and then with the security strategy, we evaluate the permissions. So all of them just basically, all of them succeed. Otherwise, we will have an exception here. And this is the last one. So we expect this to be false. And if we continue, you will see that the test will succeed. So, yep, succeed. So it means that this is how you can check the role. In this case, we were executing code to see if the security system actually was able to block the operation, the code that we were making. In this case, it's a little bit different. We are asking the security system, is this operation allowed for this user? So both are basically the same idea, executed in a different way. So let's continue. So we have another test here. In this case, basically we want to see if the admin, if we log as an admin, if we are actually able to create customers. So let's see. I'm logging as an admin, then with the secure object space right there, I create an object space and I create an instance of the customer. And I just commit the object without any setting any properties. I don't need to do that. After committing into the database, I use the object space to find the first object that there is in the table. We know that we only have one at the moment. So this object that we get from the database is exactly the same one that we just created. So this instance will be not null. It means that the admin is able to create records with the role that is associated to it. It allows him or her to create records in general. So again, this test passed. And now the security in actions. So we know that as an admin, you have permissions over everything. So in this case, we're logging again as user. And then in one of these tutorials here, it tells you that you need to set this static property of the security strategy. So enable security for actions. You have to set it to true. So after that, we ask the security strategy can execute. This is the method or the extension that you use to evaluate if that action is able to be executed. So you have to pass the action ID. And this is a constant that I have. So if I go and check the constant, is customer action. And if you see when we create this action, the ID that we pass is this constant. So if we come here, this will basically tell that this user, if we log in as a user, this user is not allowed to execute that action. So yes, debug this and see what we have. And let's see, it's false and we expect false. Why? Because we know that the role for this user basically doesn't allow the user to execute the action. So this will be also true and the test will pass. We have another test here that just passed. So
Just click continue, Jose.
yes, I think sometimes it takes time to show the icon. So, but it's here now. So, and again, it passed. And the last one. So basically, you know that sometimes if you go check the controller, before we were allowed to use the security system for actions, usually you did something like this. You use the target object criteria of the action. So I want this action to be enabled only for the customers where the property active is equals to true. Otherwise, I want it to be like gray out, you know, like disabled. So let's evaluate this. This is not related to the security system, but some people secure the actions with criteria. So, and by some people, I mean me. So let's go and check it. I'm logging as an admin. And basically, because I didn't want, I know that if I log as a user, the user doesn't have permission for that action. So it will not, the action will be disabled anyway. So in this case, I log in as an admin, then I create a customer. I set the criteria active to true, and then I create a controller. Then here was the tricky part. This took me time to figure it out. There is a controller that is called the action criteria view controller. That controller is the one that is on charge to enable or disable the actions depending on the current state of the object. That's why I put these comments in here. Here you can see all the list of XAF controllers. So I've been using XAF since day one, and I never see this controller before. I mean, it's there. It's obvious that something has have to be there for it to work, but since it's just fine, it just works perfectly. You never notice it in general. So I was surprised about that. That's why I put the notes here. So you create an instance of this controller. Then you create the detail view, and you pass the current object that we just created here. So then you create the
frame.
The frame. So the frame, you pass the application, the context, and you pass the two controllers that you have. One is the controller that we created, that is the customer controller, which contains the action. And the other one, since we're doing all of this in code, is the controller that is part of the system module that is loaded for every view and every screen and every part of the application. So I'm telling, hey, frame, use these two controllers and use this view, that is the detail view that we just created. So then I get the basically the actions from the controller, and I check the state. So you know that the actions contain this strange property that is called enable, which is a bool list of several possible combinations of if it's enabled or disabled for a reason in general. So in this case, I think this will pass because I set this to true, because I guess I was showing this to someone. So let's run this, and if not, let's change the value, because we know that when the customer is false, it should be disabled. So we're expecting false in this case. So let's run this. I think this will actually fail because this is active equals true. And yes, it did, because we were expecting the action to be not enabled, so false, but it was enabled. Why? Because the customer is active. Let's set this to false. And let's run this again. And now it passed, basically, because basically execute both controllers, and the action criteria view controller was able to disable the custom action that we created in the customer controller. So that's basically it. This is one of the most interesting examples that I have done lately. Well, including the JSON provider that we did in the other video. But it's, I mean, when something just works fine, it's invisible for you. So I never noticed this controller before. I knew that it has to be something like this, but it's amazing to still find new stuff that you are learning after so long. So this project is basically open in GitHub. You can take a look to it and just see what you can get from it. And if you need something, just copy it and paste it in your application, in your test. And again, we talk about this with you, Javier, and with everyone that we know, like testing doesn't seem too important, but in the longer run, it really pays off. So it is good to spend some time doing these small tests. And as you can see, there's not that much code in general. So give it a try it in your application and make the test for your own application, and you will see how it will pay off in the long run. And basically that's it, Javier. Any thoughts about this?
Well, the only thing that I will add that I really like this implementation, especially because you show it there all the steps involved in running a XAF application in code with no UI. That meaning from going to the updater, creating the roles, creating the object space provider, creating the provider, and actually in the last test, we could even show creating a frame, setting a view to the frame, creating the controller, getting the controller and checking the enable state for the action. So you can see every step that the XAF framework is doing to do the work that behind curtains. And I think that that's really important for people to know so they can understand XAF is not a black box. XAF, you can do everything there and you can see everything that is doing. Every time that a new view it gets created, they create the little view, they pass the object, they create the frame, they set the view, and so on, so on, so on. So definitely.
Yeah, actually, that's why I didn't want to mock anything here, because I wanted to show the flow. So it's easier to understand. It's like you understand, oh, there is a frame there somewhere. So if you know that you can get access to it, you can get access to some other stuff that are running. So that's what I like the most about the example, is that here is the flow. It's really simple. Don't think it's black magic. Maybe it is black magic in the end, but if you can organize those ideas in your mind, using XAF will be more easy in general. So that's what we get from this example.
Okay, guys.
Yep.
Hope you guys like the video. I think that this is a really interesting one, a really important one, especially because again, testing is a really important part. I would say
it's a really important part of the application.
Important part of your business or software. And see you guys in the next video.
Bye.